Thank you for being here. We are going to do the panel of how to get reuse scaled in the retail sector. I'm Olivia Merritt Fitzgerald. I'm the program coordinator for the U.S. Plastics Pact, and I'll be the panel moderator today. The U.S. Plastics Pact is a nonprofit organization, and we are a consortium of over 130 organizations that span the plastics packaging value chain. And we work with everyone to try to create a circular economy for plastics packaging in the US. One of our 5 targets is focused on reuse, so that's why we're here today. Thank you for joining us. And now I'm gonna let each of our panelists introduce themselves and their companies and what they do.
I'm Mike Newman. I'm CEO of Returnity. We help retailers and brands implement reusable packaging systems. So we make everything from rent the runways, reusable bags, to happy returns, shipping boxes. Work with a lot of retailers on reusable shopping bags, wherever reuse can make sense.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Pierre. I represent the company Danone today. So I'm sure that you know Danone has a leader in yogurt industry with Activia, Oikos, but we also big players in beverage milk and coffee creamers. Sustainability is very important for Danone. There is many ways we work on to improve packaging sustainability, getting our packaging recyclable, increasing the recycled content, and also looking at more long-term solution, and reuse is part of the solutions. So very happy to be here today and have the discussion today with you. Yeah.
Thank you.
So good morning, everybody. I am Mike Rojas. I am the Packaging Engineering Manager for Ajo del Hayes USA. Ajo del Hayes USA is a division of the global food retailer Ajo del Hayes. You might not know Ajo del Hayes, but you might know our great local brands here in the United States as Food Lion, Stop and Shop, Giant Food, The Giant Company, and Hannaford. When considered together, we are the largest grocery retailer in the East Coast and the 4th largest in the country. I work primarily with our private brands team, wherein I work with innovations, cost, and of course, sustainability. I am very passionate about sustainability, and my legal team asked me to share this in this panel that most of what I say here is my personal opinion and does not necessarily reflect the opinion of Ajo del Hayes USA. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Yeah, we always have to make sure we get the corporate jargon out there. But thank you very much to our panelists. And they 3 represent 3 of the companies that are members of the US Pact, who we call activators. And to start with a little context, the US Plastics Pact has 5 targets to Roadmap 2.0 to create circularity, and the 5th target is on reuse. And currently, we are contracting with Closed Loop Partners, who's a company that is also trying to enable a circular economy. And they are gonna come out with a report in early 2025 that identify what are the product categories that are most primed for reuse right now for returnable packaging. And so they've done life cycle analyses, interviews with brands, retailers, reuse providers, and governments across the country. And they're just looking to see what are the product categories that are best enabled to start with reuse. So once that report comes out, then the US Pact plans to launch a precompetitive cross-sector collaboration to help rally brands and retailers and reuse providers on one product category to start with in the store. So that is our goal, but right now there's a lot of challenges, and that's a bit what we're gonna talk about now. So a big question is policy. So I wanna start off with asking you all, what role does policy play in helping enable reuse?
Want me to start?
Sure.
So I think it's a very good starting point because it's policy and regulation, I think it's important for two things. Given the huge investment that is needed to make it happen, policy and regulation push the different actors to invest in the same directions. Because it's impossible that a company, even big brand, can just create this system alone. So it's very important that there is a kind of conductor that makes sure that all the actors talk together and decide about the solution and how to create a viable economy. And the second part is about regulation. If we want to make it a success in reuse, we need to communicate the benefits to the consumer. And no brand is going to invest massively in a solution if there is no claim that they could print on the packaging. So regulation gives you the frame of my solution has been approved. I participate in this new business model. So it's printed. I can be different than the rest of the market, the competition. And I think it's the regulation to create that frame for the brands.
Thanks, Pierre.
Yeah, I mean, it turns out companies don't like spending more money than they have to, and reuse costs more. Almost all open concept settings. It's different if it's like a cafeteria or a stadium where the packaging stays on site. You can often be cost competitive there. But in an open setting where the consumer's taking it home, you need them to return it, you need to clean it, it's almost always more expensive. And so without the regulation as a forcing factor, it just doesn't really happen. And so I think that is ultimately why you see it happening in fits and starts in different markets. It's regulatory driven in those settings.
So, policy, you started off with the hardest question, I guess. So for me, policy plays a critical part in the success of reuse in this country. And for me, policy really, and if you ask about how do you scale this up? Because again, we can do pilots here and there, as Mike just said, on cafeterias and all of that. But when you talk about scaling it up, I think policy is vital to make sure that hey, there is a common infrastructure among all players. Quite frankly, in my personal opinion, and I've worked with some reuse pilots before, and just talking about that, how much costly it is. It's basically just impossible. It's impossible for reuse, especially talking about business B2C, right? The business to consumer packaging without the support of policy. I use the example. I might use this example. I always use the example of solar panels, basically, how that scaled up in it didn't scale up with just just innovations on technology and stuff like that. It scaled up through policy and how they incentivized the production and the use of solar panels. And I think that should also be the case in this in reusable packaging. There should be a framework policy that helps in funding and the execution of reuse. And I want to also mention that policy has to be at the federal level, at least in this country, because that's the most efficient route to have a common infrastructure. Having piecemeal legislation and policies city or even state is more detrimental than helpful. So
Yeah, it's so hard in a compliance sector to think about having to comply to 7 different states, because there's some different states with EPR and they're all different. So thank you all for that. And I wanted to ask Mike, R, and Pierre, what do your companies think about in terms of identifying areas that might implement reusable packaging? And what are some of the challenges that Pierre mentioned a little bit of going it alone as a brand or retailer versus collaboratively? Mike, R, and Pierre.
Okay, good. So I would say that we need first to look at where are the best opportunities. meaning not sure that we have to do it for all the different products that exist. I think it's better to look at high velocity product, meaning product that we buy every week, every month, maybe where there is an harmonization of the format on the market. In the same industry, sometimes we see it's always the same format, so it's gonna be more simple to implement the solution if we have an harmonization of those formats. And yes, for example, for my company, we can imagine, okay, plant-based milk or where we have packaging that has been designed in certain country to be reusable, or we have already wash equipment or wash services that exist versus completely something new for yogurt, for example. So I think we should start with something that exists today with format that across the different players, everybody use the same. So I think in terms of opportunity, this is what we have. For challenge, for sure, it's make it viable economically. So circular economy needs to be an economy, and yes, if we don't concentrate, for example, we could start with a big urban zone,
area.
city, because it's a lot of logistic, the reuse. We need point to collect the packaging, to ship, to wash them, to return them to the producer, and to put them again on the market. So it's very important, maybe opportunity, harmonization of the format, and looking at the big cities first. Yeah, that's the starting point.
Yeah, I will just echo what Pierre just mentioned. Same opportunities. It has, as you know, reusable packaging is most efficient if it's like the locations are nearby, right? I would say though the particular challenge is also the geography of the U.S. because when you're talking about scaling it up, right? People sometimes forget that the U.S. is a vast country. You have to except in cities, of course, but you have to drive all the way out, and that presents some challenges with the logistics and, of course, carbon footprint of reusable packaging. In terms of opportunity, yeah, I mean, with the report of U.S. Plastics Pact, right? I think that I look forward to that because that would help us, identify. I think the point of that study is to help us identify what are the opportunities we could start on in terms of that, a close by locations, right?
Yeah. Thank you. So, kind of talking a little bit about pilots, reusable pilots often fail, and that could be for a number of reasons. High cost, it's hard for the consumer to transition in just a few months. So, are there any learnings from these pilots that could help in future attempts? And that's to anyone.
Yeah.
I could start off.
So first.
So yeah, based on our experience, retailers, I think, are starting to understand as well that if customers are still drawn to disposable options, even if there is a reusable option available, even at the same cost, right? They will still choose that. Convenience is king, basically, right? And we know that, customers want convenience, and we know that customers pay for convenience, and that is the particular challenge for that we learned during our pilots. How can we make reuse as the default option?
Just to build on this, there is the economical concern for sure, but it's the consumer, to put him in the middle of that system. What are the benefits for the consumer? Because it's, I would say, it's not like single-use plastic, so there is more additional things to do to store them, to maybe clean them, return them. And I think it's important to design a model that is simple and on shelf to make it visible. Because if you create a super new business model that works perfectly financially, but you put the cups or a very small part of the shelf with no visibility is not the default option, nobody will be able to see it. So you will be not able to create the success you want. So it should be not the exception, but the default solution. Without this, it's going to be very difficult.
I run a lot of pilots as a reusable packaging provider for a lot of retailers. I've got one in the field now in the Northeast with a big box retailer on reusable shopping bags. We've learned a lot. I think pilots there's a lot of frustration around pilots because people don't understand what the goal is. There's two kinds of pilots. There's a pilot that's meant to just learn, and the provider should never expect that it's going to continue or scale. You're just trying to find out some basic facts. And so you're going to run the pilot, you're going to learn some stuff, and then you're going to go back and think about what you want to do next. And then there's pilots that are meant to confirm what you should already know enables moving to scale. So you have to define which pilot, the provider and the retailer or the brand need to be in alignment on what your goal is there. Is it to learn so that you can decide in the future what you're going to do, or is it to validate so that you can then continue and scale? Most reuse pilots fail because there's misalignment between the reuse service provider and the retailer. The retailer wants to learn, the provider is hoping that their service is going to scale, and the providers, to be frank, generally should know better. They know their services aren't ready for prime time. They know that consumers aren't necessarily there. They know that these single one-off opportunities are not going to somehow magically change behavior and cut costs. And so if you don't define it up front, you're going to have failure and you're going to have frustration. We don't really have frustration anymore. I mean, it took 8 years to understand these dynamics, but we know what we're up against and we know what the goals are up front and we know what the outcome is going to be. We're going to learn things and that's value, or we're going to confirm things and that's value. But you have to know going in.
Yeah, it seems like you have to level set between organizations what the goal of the pilot is. Yeah, that makes sense. So Mike, another question for you. As a reusable packaging company, you work with business-to-business operations. What do you think needs to be true for business-to-consumer operations to work?
And we actually started doing B2B or B2C, and that was the first idea for the business. We actually made reusable shipping bags for e-commerce, and the bag worked great, except for the consumers didn't return it enough, and it was way too expensive. So the cycle costs were really high. The return rates were really low, and we're well, that's not going to work. So the reason we do B2B is because you can train employees, you can hold them accountable. It actually saves retailers money, which they like. So that has been a good foundation. You have to use that knowledge to go, and as you're going to progress, and as we progress into B2C applications, you have to still appreciate all those fundamental cycle cost and consumer behavior challenges and build from that. And I think the learning that we've had is in all that hopefully can help guide B2C is that we can't over hype reuse as this somehow today we have single use and single use is bad and wasteful, and tomorrow we're going to have reuse and reuse is going to be nirvana and perfect, and we just need to get everybody to move to reuse. But that is not, it's not true even if everyone did. Reuse has its own costs environmentally and economically. There is no perfect in this world. So I think the challenge in moving to B2C is to level set expectations. What can reusable packaging accomplish? Why is that important? And how can we be modest in our ambition rather than trying to do these moonshots that continue to fail and don't really address the real on-the-ground behavior? So the B2B stuff we've learned that we try and bring to the table is that grounding and foundation of how does this stuff really work in the field? What are people really going to do with it? And how do we get really focused on where it can be successful so that you have foundations to build from and continue?
Yeah, Yeah, I think that's a really important point you made is like reuse is not going to be everywhere, nor should it be, but like where can it work and you focus on that. It's just one part of the puzzle. So thanks for calling that out. So talking about the consumer and convenience, and a big difference in reuse from B2B to B2C is you're bringing the consumer along. So a question to all of you is, how can we make reuse as convenient as possible for the consumer, because convenience is king today?
Very good question.
$1 million question, right?
Yeah.
For sure, yeah. It starts with something that is simple, and if you ask them to do more, we have to communicate very clearly about the benefits. Or if you ask them to return the container, or even pay more to finance that system, you have to make sure that you communicate clearly economical or environmental benefits with KPI that they all understand. For example, we have saved X thousand of tons of plastic with this type of container, or we can use this container up to 40 times, new cycles. Carbon footprint is interesting internally, but they don't really understand how, 1 ton of CO2, what it is. Nobody understands that. So I think it's really better to communicate very basic KPI that everybody understands, and to communicate about those benefits. I started the discussion with the claim, with maybe a logo. We have many logos on the market for packaging sustainability, how to recycle logo, for example. Why not tomorrow having a specific claim about reuse and the benefits of reuse? So it's part of the equation, but that's true that it's not easy to ask them to, except for just putting it in the garbage, clean them, or ask someone to pick up the empty containers. Maybe with the new ways of shopping online, or the new technologies, it will evolve. It's something that we'll be able to have it more digital with specific app. Why not? It's an opportunity, but I think we are not there today. I think it's more powerful if communicate about economic benefits, like as an incentive. If I return my container, I get my money back, 10, 15 cents per container, and benefits for the planet. At that moment, I think it's the two key message I would recommend.
I just wanted to echo that again. So it's communication is key, and of course we want to communicate that it's convenient, but stepping back, it has to be part of a communication plan so that it is communicated properly as well. So it's all throughout the life cycle of that reusable packaging. I would like to also point out as well that communication is just one thing, it's an important thing, but we also have to prove it, right? That it is convenient as well, which is to your point, that's the most difficult thing. But it is when you think about it, why is it difficult? Why is it returning, if we reuse this, let's say coffee cup or something like that, why is it difficult why is it not convenient, basically, right? And our answer is our perspective is that it just doesn't have the infrastructure behind it, right? You have to have a common infrastructure to match that convenience, and we can talk about it later on. But it's how the vision is how do you make that coffee cup be collected anywhere in the world, for example. So
Right, with a lot of collection points. So you just drop it off like you would throw something away. You just drop it into the collection bin. Yeah, anything to add, Mike?
I just think that, I mean, this is a really important area to de-romanticize. You know, consumers they live very busy, complicated lives. The idea that they're going to make this an important part of how they change their like how they consume products because you put a bin somewhere is a bit arrogant. Like, there's a reason why people like using single-use packaging. It's very simple and it's easy and they don't have to think about it. So you're asking them to think about a thing that they're probably not going to think about that much. And why are we going to imagine that they're going to think about and prioritize that over all the other things they have to do in the day? So that doesn't mean that we should be defeatist. It just means we have to be realistic. And you know, the example I would use is we work with a lot of companies in Europe. And when we talk to them about some of the challenges, they'll say, well, in Germany, they reuse all their glass bottles. Like they collect almost 100% of them. I say, yeah, it's amazing. But that's an accident of culture and history, and they don't do that in France or Switzerland, or like every country around Germany doesn't do that. If it was so simple, why isn't it happening in those other markets that are very close by? It's really hard to make this change. So you have to like embody that change. You have to be straightforward about it and understand why consumers are and are not doing it, and then communicate both internally and externally around why it isn't working perfectly now. It doesn't have to work perfectly right now. You just have to understand the gaps and then have a plan that allows you to progress through what is probably going to take years. I mean, it's culture change. It takes years. And as long as you are appreciative of that, you can get there, but you have to embody that.
Okay, so one question is that we have touched on, but what is the benefit for so for instance, collection points, washing infrastructure? What are the benefits for brands, retailers, and reuse providers kind of going in on one category and collaborating together versus doing it on their own?
Basically, a lot of benefits. Mike just mentioned it a while ago. It's really on cost. And like, how do you expect retailers to also retailers won't and brands won't shoulder the entire cost of it. It's very hard to do business and like still be profitable with that. And I use the example of like, hey, we can build a store, for example. We build a store and we build the aisles there and we get the products in that store, right? That's gonna be our business. But imagine if we're also going to pay for the road that's going into our store, for example. That road was actually built with infrastructure, government and government policy support, right? What if we also made the car that the consumer will like drive in? I think it's very much important on like.
Yeah, building efficiencies, right?
Building efficiencies.
Yeah.
No, I think I also mentioned that without a collective discussion, because there is many actors, there is the packaging designer, packaging producer, the wash service, equipment services. If it's not a complete transformation of an industry to target what are the different formats, what is the packaging we are now all run the same, it make it almost impossible. Because if I run my packaging and you after it's washed, it's clean, my competitor cannot use it and I cannot use my competitor packaging. It's not a circular economy if I'm the only one that can use that packaging in my factory. Mm-hmm. So it's very important that, and I think we have example in Europe, for example, when for same type of bottle or glass bottle, we have a system of reuse, deposit, wash, and reuse that it's working pretty well because there is an harmonization on the market in those specific categories. But it's a big transformation. You mentioned it's years of transformation for companies to create that model. Yeah.
Okay, well, we have time for audience questions. So I would like to invite anyone to ask a question. We'll have someone with a mic walk around. So anyone have a question they'd like to ask? And if not, we have other questions too.
Thank you. Did it work? Yeah. I always have trouble with mics, I'm sorry. So thank you very much. Completely concur. First of all, there's no silver bullet. It's purpose for purpose. So sometimes reusable, sometimes single use. I mean, and recycling, that's all part of the package. And, talking about the pilots and the purposes behind the pilots, things like that. And also the fact that, companies are working together to find solutions that you can share. You did mention about consumer behavior. And yes, it's taken us so many years to get here and be that throwaway society. I mean, several people have mentioned different talks. When you talk to if you look at what your grandparents did, they reused everything. And now it's like, just throw it away. So changing that mentality, long way around coming to my question, is you talk about the technical part, sharing the same shape, packaging, etc. Is there any value, or are you working on an integrated message? So it's a message not just from Danone or from Ahold or from other companies, but it's a concerted message from all of you along the same things to try and move things at the same pace, but also because you're having to use governments as part of, that collection system, bringing them into the fold. So you have a concerted message that's coming from everyone to drive that. I know it's not simple, I know, but are you looking and talking amongst your associations, not just on the technical side, but on that messaging and how you can have one voice?
Right.
Thank you. Yeah, so open it up.
I think, for example, my company Danone, all what I know is single-use plastic. I'm 34. It's all what I know is this, because in the past Danone was glass jar, and the same thing that you mentioned, the milk, right? At the doorstep, the milk, very frequently, every week or every day you receive the milk, and this has stopped. So how we provide now. It's not a new message, but we re-communicate about that message and those benefits. And I've started the discussion about the claim, and this is where it's important, because if you're not able to certify that with my packaging is better than the rest of in the industry, there is no investment. And because people, they want transparency and trust. They want a system they can trust. And I think without this type of claims we could print on our packaging, it's a miss to have a success. We see this on recyclability. So I imagine exactly the same thing on reuse. People will always ask, is it really true that this packaging is recyclable? So maybe they will not pay more for this, or they will maybe not put it in the right bin to make it recyclable. Same thing for reuse. If they don't trust that system, it's not proven, it's not certified, they will maybe do it once, but after they will stop. So we have to really have a system that is proven, with very impactful benefits for planets.
So you're asking about a concerted message, right? And you specifically asked for not technical, but my answer is still going back to technical. And when I hear concerted message, it is basically standards for us. So a standardized system of reuse for again, for the applications that are applicable to reusable packaging, right? So, and if we're part of that system, that is our message, so that we are part of a bigger system, more than our companies, if that makes sense. So I think that, I guess, again, technical standardization alone, and we are working on that with other companies, that message alone will help, the consumers understand that, hey, this, for example, this particular reusable packaging can be collected in like multiple locations, for example.
I love this question because I do think it gets to one of the fundamental gaps we have right now in the conversation around packaging and impact and reuse specifically. So when the milkman model was prominent, supermarkets had like 4,000 SKUs maybe. Now they have 70,000. People like the choices they have. They like the convenience. They like the quality. They like the lifestyle that they're living. And I don't think it's our job to go and tell our neighbors that they're living their lives wrong. It's society's. This is a society level problem. It is not a brand problem. It is not a retail problem. It is a society problem. But we don't want to have the conversation with our neighbors to see if they really are on board with the idea that packaging waste is such a problem that as a society, we should decide that it's important for all of us to change our behavior to address it. Instead, we want to blame retailers and brands. Now, brands and retailers have a lot of blame to take. They're not perfect actors here, but the challenge is that then you put in the reusable and your neighbors don't return it that much. So is that Coke's problem or, Target's problem that your neighbor is not doing it? It's our collective problem. So a common message from industry might help, but it has to be accompanied by a society level dialogue around, is this that important to us as a society? Do we all get on board with this idea that we should change how we consume products in our market to address these issues? And that conversation is not happening.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question from the audience. Yeah. We have someone in the front up here. Thanks.
It's on?
Yes.
So do retailers ever consider like incentive programs for consumers to maybe give them discounts at your store for doing this?
Yes, but it didn't work. Short answer. And yeah, again, convenient still, and that's why I was like mentioning a while ago, convenience is still king. Even if like it's the same cost, and that's what we've been learning, same cost, even if we put in like discounts as well, that is the hard truth of that. And like to Mike's point a while ago, it's really not just a retailer issue where we can like, hey, give like discounts here and there. It's really a societal problem, and yeah, I totally agree with that.
And it's already more expensive, so then you add a discount incentive on top, and you have to track it, and you have to have, like, it just adds so many, like, that's a pretty common thought, is like, well, what if we track and we do incentives and we do an app, we do all these things to try and drive behavior, but then you're adding a lot of layers of cost and management on top of a system that's already more expensive than the incumbent system. And it isn't, if it drove a lot of change in behavior, then it might be worth it, but it's pretty marginal. And unfortunately isn't like the panacea we might want it to be.
Okay, well, we will end with a closing question. I know it's flown by, but thank you all for joining. We had a lot of discussion, different challenges, some solutions of kind of what are some different solutions in terms of communication, infrastructure. So I would like for each of you to let us know what one takeaway from this discussion is for folks to take back to their organizations.
I can start. So I just wanted to echo Mike's point a while ago that this is really a societal issue, and in my words, I always use the systemic problems require systemic solutions, right? And for me, one of the systemic solutions that that I think it's needed for reusable packaging to scale up is policy. That is a systemic solution, and that's us as a society agreeing together in moving in moving this forward, in moving again. I wanted also to mention that we are also part of the PR3 reusable standards panel. I thought we were going to get to that question, but yeah, we're actually working on a global reusable packaging standards, so that a wider set of businesses and communities can connect to that common infrastructure and standard. So for me, it's policy, which is a systemic issue, systemic solution, and standards as well, which is a systemic solution as well. So just think about that, and that's how I think reuse will scale up in the US.
Thank you.
Just to reinforce the same message that it's not technically feasible to do it alone. We need a lot of collaboration, and we started the discussion with policy, and I think it's a key element in reality in this equation. Let's do the parallel. For example, the EPR fees that we pay for, extended producer responsibility, where we pay for the waste management of the packaging. So now we have regulation in every state for recycled content in all our packaging, but it's really driven by the regulation. So yes, at some point there is education of all the consumer. Yeah, the point is very valid. In fact, it's a society, issue, and the way we do shopping and the choice that we made on shelf. But it's sometimes really driven by policy and regulation. And if we want someone to be the conductor of all of this transformation, there is no, I would say, some better candidate than policy government, but federal. I get your point about not different law per different state. Something that across the country we all have the same rules. Without this, it would be very, very difficult.
I'll just say, consumer behavior is challenging to evolve, but so is corporate behavior. So if your businesses aren't thinking about this today, we might not know exactly when and how reuse is going to scale in retail and what product categories, but you should be sure that it's not going away as a policy issue and as a regulatory issue. So you need to get involved with the Plastics Pact if you're not already. You should be at the table, because you're going to have to change as a business too, in ways that you might not like, and better to be knowledgeable today than forced later.
Yeah, and that's why we're having this conversation. We need all the perspectives at the table to talk about it and come up with solutions together. So thank you for the plug, Mike. Thank you, all three of you, for being here, and thank you to our audience for attending. But we'll be able to answer questions one-on-one. But have a great rest of your day and Pact Expo.